first thing that I really wanted to dive into was in the Building a Great Business book. You mentioned and made a clear distinction between having a vision and having a strategic plan,
Yeah.
and how they are different. And you made
Yep.
it clear that it's important to write down your vision. Can you talk about that distinction between those two and why it's so important to physically write a vision down?
Yeah. I mean, and all this, of course, is just my take or our take here. It doesn't mean other people have to do what we're saying. But as we define it, and everybody gets to have their own definitions, but a vision is a description of what success is going to look like, feel like, sound like, in our case, taste like at a particular point down the road. So if you're starting a business, your vision would, detail what your business feels like. What do the staff feel like? How do the customer view you? What do you do? It would include some metrics so that you'd have some idea of scale and scope. So not, to the penny, but if you're doing $1 million in sales is totally different than if you're doing 100,000, which is totally different than if you're doing 100 million, right? And there's merit to all of them. It's just having some sense of what you want to create and describing that so that other people around you who you're working with, your partners, your staff, your vendors, your community, ultimately have some idea of where a pretty good idea of where you're actually going. The strategic plan, as we look at it, is more how you get there. So the vision we often say is the what, and the plan is the how, right? So we don't really work on a plan until we've already decided where we're going,
Right.
which only makes sense in the same context as, if you try to figure out how to pack for a trip, but you don't know what the trip is, it's a little difficult.
So you initially wrote your first vision, and it was a 15-year vision mapping out the future of the company. And that brought you right up to about like 2007, where you wrote your second 13-year vision that took you through 2020. Now we're currently at 2020. So I assume that you already worked on your next vision. So
Yeah.
what is that vision for Zingerman's for the next 10 to 15 years?
Well, to be clear, there's a essay in that same book called 12 Natural Laws of Business, and it's my belief that any healthy, successful organization, because nonprofits are really, in my mind, not any different than businesses. They just have a different uh, financial structuring. But uh, in any healthy organization, whether it's a basketball team or a university or a business, or has a vision of where they're going. Now, whether they actually write it down or not is a different story. So when in '82 when we opened, I mean, Paul and I, in hindsight, clearly had a vision. We just didn't write it down. We didn't know anything, about visioning the way that we do now. So that really was the first one. Um, and it was really when, Paul sort of had an intuitive realization that we had essentially fulfilled that original vision that, that we sat down and actually, for the first time, wrote out a vision and learned the process, at a very basic level, but learned the process that we now use so regularly. To answer your question directly about, so we actually have a 2032 vision that we've been working on for, I don't know, a year and a half. That's probably 96% done, and we were actually supposed to roll it out last week, but given the current state of the world, uh, a few other things have preempted that in terms of priority. So it's a little on hold. So it's not totally finished, but we've got it mostly done. If the world calms down at some point and we can go back to business in some form that resembles normal, then we can start getting back to work on doing that.
Awesome. And is it possible to get a little sneak peek of some of these things that are going to be happening in the next 12 years for Zingerman's?
Well, it's still a draft, so I guess anything could change. But going from memory, because I don't have it in front of me right this second. But our visions. I mean, which from the book, but people might not realize our visions are pretty long. They're pretty detailed descriptions. So the 2020 vision is about 9 pages long, and this one's probably about the same. What are some of the things it talks about? It talks about working in harmony with nature. So that would mean working more in harmony, more and more in harmony with nature ecologically, but also uh, enhancing and building on the work that we've already done. What to do? What I think is operating in harmony with human nature by honoring the people in the organization as the unique beings they are, and helping them to become themselves ever more effectively. It talks about starting to do a lot more work with kids in terms of or young people in terms of teaching the processes that we already teach, because I believe there's no reason you can't teach visioning to 7-year-olds, and there's no reason not to teach young people about energy management or servant leadership or how to run meetings. Those are all really life skills that I wish I would have learned at 10. It would have made my life a lot more effective. So there's stuff about that. Uh, there's also, of course, talks about our food and our service and how we make those better, and our finance. It talks about starting to open non-food businesses for the first time.
Wow.
And it does restate our commitment to staying just here in the Ann Arbor area, uh, which is a very important thing for me and others.